she fell into the. I said ULB like L Bug, but more hood like Ice T, and that's cool like Miles Davis walked in the room and redefined the groove.
Hey everybody, it's your beautifully delicious co-host Patrick Downs. Here's a new series. This is going to be something like Storytime Magic. I'm still working on the title. It'll be in nice letters up here. But my first guest is Gil Cohen, a very good friend of mine. And today I want to invite him on and have him tell us a little bit about his experiences with employee experience and talk about why it's something he's so passionate about. And Gil, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Gil Cohen. I am a consultant out of the Toronto area. Just in the beginning of January, I started my own company called Employee Experience Design. I've been a consultant for most of my 20-year career, but I'm sure we'll get into that in a moment.
Yeah. I'd like to start with the work you did with your dad. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So for the first 16 or so years coming out of school, I worked for my dad, consultant, boutique consultancy also here in Toronto, and working around a wide variety of areas around talent management, HR, leadership, etc., with a specific focus around values and behaviors. So coming out of school, I didn't know enough to be a consultant, certainly. So I started just by cleaning his office and taking notes for him and that kind of thing. But over time, I got to, run my own workshops, run my own projects. And the work he did really resonated with me because it was grounded in psychology. That's what my undergrad degree was in. And so it really resonated with me because he was trying to change practical things, changing people's behaviors, understanding what can and can't be changed around culture. And so that's what I did for the first 15, 16 years of my career. I worked with my dad.
Was it a very intentional thing for your father to get into this sort of work, or was it something you fell into?
It's actually interesting. So my dad, for the first 15 or so years of his career, was in education. He got his doctorate in education and was a principal for some time. But then after a while of being in education, he couldn't handle the parents anymore. So it was time for him to move on, and he did a test, a kind of aptitude kind of test of with a career counselor at the time, 30 something years ago, that recommended that he get into consulting, that he had the right aptitude for consulting. So he worked for a while in places like Hay and in a couple of other smaller companies here in Toronto before he started his own firm in the early 90s, centered around really his own beliefs. So he sort of fell into it, but it was always grounded in education and the things that he had learned previously.
Man, I've been sitting here like ignoring these aptitude tests my whole life. Maybe I should have listened, because it seems like it led to good things for your father.
Well, I mean, look, considering where you are and the success you're having, I really would say there's not much for you to complain about having not done that. I mean, it's not for everybody. It's not the path for everybody. Sometimes we have to find our own way.
Mine were always like, you should do data entry. And then in a kind of fucked up way, I ended up sort of doing that, being in sales. CRM data entry. It's a sick joke from the aptitude test.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's also part of the problem with doing an aptitude test too early in life, is that it might be a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it might limit you from what you actually could become.
And in a way, like your father was kind of your aptitude test for this, where like he gave you exposure to something, you ended up loving it. I'm curious about how your work might differ from what you were doing with your father. Do you feel like you took a big step away from it, or is it along the same lines?
I took maybe a half step away from it and a different angle. That's what I would say. So I worked for him, like I said, for 15, 16 years, but in my later time, my last 6 months or so, I'd lost my passion for it, a lot of the work that he did. And that's when I discovered in 2017, the idea of employee experience. and the mindset around looking at the organization as an experience as consumed by the employees. And so that is really where the differences between his work and my work lie. His work is still grounded in more traditional talent management, HR, leadership kind of practices, where mine takes a bit more of a turn around including the employee lens and a focus on the experience that people are having.
Mm. And it's kind of strange because when I've talked to you about this, like the passion is so real that it feels like you have lived through a lot of it, while it's really a lot of secondhand experience. So I'm curious, like, where did you learn most of what you're teaching? And like, how did you learn especially that like empathy portion? Because when you talk about like people having bad work experiences, your stories seem so real, and it seems like you almost live them even though you haven't. I'm curious where that comes
So
from.
there's a few questions there, and
Yes.
I'll need you to keep me honest and tie me back to getting back to all of the answers. Because I think the first question you had asked was around my passion and around my passion for what I do. So the passion, as well as a lot of the knowledge around what I do, was grounded in my years working for my dad, both, taking notes for him and running my own focus groups. Because I spent the first 15 years of my career sitting in rooms with groups of employees telling me what they did and didn't like about their experience, what they did and didn't like about work, and what made them successful. And for me, that was a foundational experience. One, because I learned the things that people do and don't like, and what things are universal and what things aren't universal. But it also was powerful for me because I would hear the frustration that people would have with the decisions that their leaders would make. The frustration that if my leader just knew this thing that people try to tell them, they would make different decisions. They would do things differently around here, and it would be better for everybody. So when it comes to my passion really is about the fact that we all spend 100,000 plus hours of our life at work. Our lives are impacted beyond just that time. I think often about where my passion is in terms of how I want to change things. And one of the metaphors I use, and I think I've talked to you about, the idea of Smondays, the idea of somebody feeling that stress on a Sunday afternoon of knowing they've got to go back to that horrible place for 5 days, and the impact that has on a person's life. So I metaphorically want to eliminate Mondays. I would love for every organization to give people the experience where on Sunday afternoon, a person is excited to go back to work. And the sad thing is I posted about this on LinkedIn. I posted on this topic on LinkedIn, and there were multiple people who didn't believe that doesn't exist. There were multiple people who responded like, yeah, everybody feels like that. That's how it is for everybody. I can tell you personally that it's not, from firsthand experience, that it's not, that it doesn't have to be this way. And I've spoken to numerous people who are excited about the work they do and excited to do it with the people they get to do it with, the teams they get to work with. There is a better way. There's a better way of organizing. There's a better way of designing your organization that ultimately creates better lives for your people. And that's really where my passion comes from. That's really where the heart of what I do. And yes, there's also a business case for it. I could talk you through the business case for it, no problem. But when I need to, I do. But that's not where my heart is. That's not where my excitement is when I talk about the work that I do. It's about somebody coming to work and no longer being miserable because their boss has changed their behavior, because now they are being included in decisions that they weren't before, allowing to be part of something, making change management so much easier too, which is another business case for all of this. But that's really where my passion is understanding that it impacts people's lives. As you and I have talked about, the idea of Sonder, the recognition that everybody is a protagonist in their own life. Because that goes against the traditional lens of leadership and the traditional lens of management, that everybody's just there, A, to make money, and B, provide value to the company. Just not true. Just not true. And the reality is that when an organization recognizes that each person is an individual, each person is a protagonist that has goals that they're trying to accomplish, they're able to make decisions in alignment with organizational goals that are better for everyone. So that's where my passion is. The empathy side is a tougher one. The empathy side, I think, is partly just a natural thing in me, that this is, I've just always been curious about people, about why things happen. And so for me, the empathy piece, there's the personal empathy of being a human being, being able to have a conversation, relate to what another person's going through emotionally. But then there's also the side of professional empathy, of understanding how to help an organization collect the voice of the employee, how to help the organization look through that employee lens so that it will be empathetic in its decision making. Which is a very different thing, because as a personal empathy, there is a more emotional attachment. Whereas with professional empathy, it is about looking at a little bit more objectively of how to create the organization, how to make decisions in alignment with what that person's looking for. And emotional attachment is part of it, but there's also a part of making it in alignment what's best for the person's physical wellness. What's the best for the person's social wellness? What is the best for overall person? And how can that then drive their productivity? So empathy for me is, I guess, always been a part of me. So I guess it makes sense that that's then a part of what I do, is help organizations look at things from their people's perspective.
And I think just like probably hearing over and over again how miserable people are, it's hard not to be like, oh my God, and start internalizing that in a way. While you're not that person, like you can feel it, especially if you're an empathetic person, like how much pain they're in. And anytime somebody's in pain, like you're going to naturally want to help or understand better. And I think seeking to understand means that you're able to tell their story better because you've at least like seen it from their side, even if you haven't lived it.
Absolutely. And that's the problem, is that a lot of organizations, a lot of leaders sort of forget what it's like, because they're raised under this paradigm that you do what you do, and it's, you do it at people. You make a decision because there's the trend or a narrative in your head that you make it at people, and that doesn't help people. And like you said, I sat for years sitting, listening to people talk about their misery. That wasn't the focus of most of the conversations, but it happened. It was there. And so I did internalize, okay, well, what caused their misery? And because I was able to go to enough organizations, I was able to see the differences, that in some organizations it's misery that's caused, in some organizations it's joy that's caused. It's motivation, it's inspiration. And so that, and then seeing that difference. And I know for working at my old company, that was one thing that really motivated me, was helping solidify the experience that people were having, that it developed over time, where people were excited by it. Where when people would come on, based on the onboarding, the user-centric onboarding that we created, people were amazed. They're like, I've never been in a company that treats you like this when you come on. It makes you feel so connected and helps you move to productivity.
And I want to also touch on, because I did ask 2 questions, so I have 2 responses. You had talked about how people mostly just dread going to work on Sunday. I mean, I've heard some people say Sunday Scaries, and I
Whatever you want
didn't
to
even
call it. We all know
understand.
that feeling. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Is whether you call it Sunday Scaries, call it Mondays, or just mention that feeling in the pit of your stomach. If you've had a career long enough, you felt that feeling. And some people, like I said, don't know anything but that feeling. They think that's just a part of work. They haven't worked at a company that does anything but that.
And also outside of personal experiences, I feel like culturally in our media and in our relationships, it's pretty common to talk about like, man, I don't want to go to fucking work today. Like every movie ever, like, does anyone ever talk positively about going to work on Monday?
But
Like,
isn't that just art imitating life, right? Because
yeah.
that's represented from the real experiences that people have. I hate to say it, but for fans of The Office, there's a reason why Toby, the HR guy, is the way he is. Because a lot of people have that experience from their HR groups, right? So the fact that people in media come across as miserable to go to work, there's a reason behind that. There's a reason behind that. But a lot of people don't know that it can be better. And that's what I want to help. I want to help leaders understand they can make better decisions. They don't have to make their people miserable. It's not just a part of doing business.
And then you also take into account like significant portion of our country is living paycheck to paycheck. It's hard to be excited to do something that barely supports you. And then it's probably something you don't even like or have passion behind. And then we have all these people working jobs they don't like to get money that doesn't support them. And then we're surprised that nobody likes their job. Like, yeah, no shit.
Yeah.
And there's so many people that don't even understand that there is another option and that they have to take a risk to go towards it, but it exists. But it's
Some people
scary.
can't afford that risk. So that's the thing. And that's what I'm empathetic with many employees, that they're stuck in bad situations. They're stuck with a company that they have no option to go to another employer, especially right now with the problems that we're going through because of the pandemic. So I completely understand where some people aren't able to take that risk based on where they are in their life. And that's why I want to help organizations make that change. That it's not up to the people to make these changes. They don't have that kind of power to be able to make the real structural changes to the experience. It's up to leaders to recognize that they need to make the change. Then they actively make the change.
Hmm. So with the work you've done, like where are you seeing the major misses? Like what are like the lowest hanging fruit that we could just like chop off right away?
You know, it's really tough. It's really tough because every company is so different. I would say the biggest misses come around communication. That would be the probably for most organizations the first place to look at. And when I say communication, I mean two-way, open. So first of all, there's the two-way side. That is, most organizations think corporate communications is telling the employees things. Communication is a two-way street. You're a sales guy. You ever make a sale without of some sort of flow of information in both directions? You need to ask the questions to understand what people are thinking before then you're able to convey your side and the value that your company brings. And so with leadership, it's not just enough to say corporate communications is us sharing information. How much are we able to convey our message to people? But then also creating that feedback loop of how do we collect information from people? And I don't mean an engagement survey every other year, because that becomes meaningless. That actually becomes insulting to a lot of people, because they're like, well, they only care about our opinion at once every couple of years and nothing changes in between that time. So I would say communication. So there's the two-way side to it. Then there's the open side to communication of how do you create a freer flow. I believe you and I have talked about the iceberg of ignorance, the fact that frontline staff have a significantly higher knowledge of the problems faced within an organization than executives do. And the number gets smaller as you move up that corporate ladder. That's causing executives pain they don't even realize exists, because they're not collecting that information. So first, they're not even trying. And second of all, even if they try, they're not necessarily creating the environment of trust and psychological safety to get honest answers. So it's one thing to open yourself up to it. It's another thing how you respond to it. So if you ask questions of employees to understand how they're doing, and they're being open with you, there's going to be problems. No work environment is perfect. And how you respond to that, do you shut them down or do you listen? Do you show that you're actually taking action? Because one of the problems also with these yearly surveys, and I've talked to a lot of employees on this subject, is that they come out, employees fill out the survey, nothing gets done, and then they have another survey the next year. And nobody wants to answer it, honestly, if they answer it at all. Because why would I take my time filling out a survey that I know is just going to be ignored, sitting on some shelf somewhere? You know, it'll be a nice, pretty binder that nobody does anything with. So you have to create that environment, that create that trust that people will actually share when given the opportunity. And a lot of leaders think a lot more highly of what their people share than is true. They aren't aware of how much they don't know.
How could they be aware besides surveys?
There's a lot of ways to be aware. That's the thing, is so there are a lot of advances in employee voice over the years, and there are improvements in a lot of tech and applications. Not my world, but there are a lot of improvements in a lot of ways that can be done. But there are a lot of ways also to collect employee voice, not just from surveys. I mean, the ideal way that most organizations are incapable of doing is directly to a person's manager. But most organizations don't have that strength in managerial capabilities to create that trust and to create that strength of relationship that people share completely openly with their manager. So there are other ways of getting it. Surveys, when done correctly, can help. There's employee resource groups, and then there's also, you know, what we've talked about in terms of co-creation, of starting to include people in the creation, in the design process, in the decision-making process, where it's not even, you know, saying to them, how are you thinking about things, but bringing along when the organization's saying, we're trying to improve a certain process, let's work with it together, because that's how user-centric design is done. It's not done in a vacuum. You can't do user-centric design without your user. Then you're just stuck with the narrative in your head, which is limited information, which is why we have so much misery.
Well, thank you for explaining where misery comes from. That was very enlightening. I think that's a great place to end. That caps off the first episode of Storytime Magic. Is there anything that you want to plug?
No, nothing that I want to plug other than 5 on Friday. If you're not already following these guys, they do amazing work, and they are also really helpful to the community that they're supporting. So if there's anybody I want to give a shout out to right now, I'm going to give it to 5 on Friday.
Thank you. We need it. You know, we're poor, we're hungry. I'm kidding, we're not, but I do appreciate it. And yeah, I'm hoping to do more of these. If anybody listening is interested in sharing their story with me, please reach out to me, patrick.downs@pandadoc.com, or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Please connect with Gil. His content's incredible. He's kind of a viral superstar right now, so you maybe already know him. And yeah, guys, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.
Abraham Lincoln in that navy blue. Don't let that long arm of justice paint you blue. For the Native and American and African American man, we all stand together like the colors of the flag. So a man of the land is the man of the nation.